By noon the lake was a bruised crescent of mud. A rented pump roared like a dragon with a drinking problem while HOA President Mara Yates posed for photos in a reflective vest. She shouted to no one in particular, declaring this was all about public safety. 10 minutes later, 3 white pickups fishtailed onto the dam with County Water Authority decals on the doors, faces pale with panic. The man in front took one look at the draining lake and screamed a question that made my blood run cold. Who touched my reservoir? I'm Caleb Orson. I write code for a living, grow tomatoes in whiskey barrels on my deck, and bought a little A-frame house on the shore of Crescent Tarn in a private development called Pinecrest Hollow. The lake is small and clear, fed by a spring that sings even in August when everything else runs dry. I keep to myself mostly. Coffee at dawn, kayak at dusk, and a radio that only knows jazz. That peaceful existence ended when Mara Yates moved in. She's a suburban Napoleon in a puffer vest who got elected HOA president after promising bold action on aesthetic threats. Those threats apparently included my wind chimes, my unpainted canoe rack, and eventually, hydrology itself. Before the lake incident, I'd already accumulated $700 in fines. My deck chairs were the wrong shade of beige. My mailbox post leaned 3 degrees past vertical after a storm. My tomato plants were visible from the street and therefore constituted agricultural blight. Marla enforced every rule like she was defending the Alamo, and when the rules didn't exist, she invented new ones in emergency board meetings she called with 48 hours notice on Tuesday afternoons when most people worked. It started with a soggy spring and a rumor that spread like wildfire on Nextdoor. Marla announced that Crescent Tarn was a freight train of flood risk barreling toward our community. She waved around a printout of a YouTube thumbnail showing a dam exploding, not our dam and not even our state, and declared an emergency. She organized a mandatory community meeting in the clubhouse where she presented a slideshow with stock photos of floods, ominous music she played from her phone, and statistics about dam failures that had nothing to do with our lake. When I pointed out that Crescent Tarn had a natural overflow spillway and had existed peacefully for thousands of years before we built houses around it, she accused me of being pro-flood. She fined me $200 for what she called upland leaching because my rain barrels supposedly hoarded water that should flow naturally toward the lake she wanted to drain. The logic was a pretzel, but the fine was real. Then she installed flood alert signs around the lake that whistled in the wind like haunted flutes, each one costing the HOA $300 from a supplier who was coincidentally her brother-in-law. But that wasn't enough for Marla. She came up with a plan to drain the lake down for safety and compliance. Her evidence. A highlighted paragraph from the HOA landscaping addendum about maintaining proper drainage and a line she wrote herself during an emergency session that said the president may act swiftly to avert imminent watery peril. The vote passed 4-3 with 2 board members absent and one who later claimed she thought they were voting on new trash can regulations. Marla hired a contractor whose business card listed pumps, party tents, and exotic llamas in that order. His name was Dale, and he showed up on a Thursday with 2 industrial pumps that could drain a swimming pool in 20 minutes. The orange hose was big enough to fit a raccoon inside, and he ran it down the access road toward the valley below where it would dump millions of gallons of our lake into a ravine. When I asked Dale if he had permits, he said Marla told him the HOA president was basically the same as the mayor. When I asked if he knew what the lake was used for, he said he thought it was decorative. What Marla did not know, and what would become her spectacular downfall, was that Crescent Tarn isn't just a pretty puddle for kayaking. Beneath the old granite spillway, a county easement carries a screened intake for the entire valley's potable water supply. It was installed decades before Pinecrest Hollow even existed, back when people still named things after trees without cutting them all down. I had discovered the easement while clearing brush one afternoon and kept a copy of the documents in a fireproof folder. The technical drawings showed pipes, flow rates, and a service area that covered 3 towns and part of the county seat. When those pumps kicked on and the lake line started dropping fast, my kitchen tap coughed air and sputtered brown. I called county water immediately, gave them my address, and said someone was draining the reservoir. The dispatcher asked me to repeat that twice. Then she said to stay on the line. I could hear her typing frantically and talking to someone else in the background. By the time I reached my mailbox, their trucks were already dusting up the access road with emergency lights strobing red and blue across the pines. The water authority manager was a woman with a pencil tucked behind her ear and the battlefield calm of someone who'd seen bureaucratic disasters before. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she brought a clipboard thick enough to beat someone with. She read the easement plaque bolted into the spillway, then flipped through the HOA bylaws that Marla helpfully offered, then examined Marla's emergency lake reduction directive with growing disbelief. Her eyebrows went north and set up camp there. She asked Marla in a voice like frozen iron if she understood what an easement was. Marla said it sounded like something about property rights, which was technically true but catastrophically incomplete. Patricia explained very slowly that this lake didn't belong to the HOA. The water belonged to the county. The HOA owned the land around it, but the water itself and 20 feet down from the high water mark was public infrastructure. Marla's face went through several colors before settling on defensive red. The sheriff arrived within 20 minutes. So did state environmental quality inspectors and, for extra spice, a stern-looking man from the Bureau of Reclamation wearing a hat that looked federally binding. They shut the pumps off immediately, cited the contractor for unauthorized water diversion, and asked in very official tones who had authorized this drawdown. Marla pointed at me with a shaking finger, claiming I was probably behind this somehow, then gestured vaguely at the sky, then tried to point at an abstract concept she called leadership and decisive action. The sheriff, a patient man named Rodriguez, gently but firmly rotated her pointing finger back toward herself. He asked if she authorized the pumping. She said yes, but only for safety. He asked if she consulted with county water first. She said she didn't think she needed to because it was HOA property. He wrote that down with the careful deliberation of someone documenting a confession. The county manager unrolled a laminated map like a magician's scarf and tapped the easement rectangle with one manicured nail. She explained in a voice that could cut steel that this lake feeds 62,000 people. Potable water for schools, the hospital sterilizers, dialysis units, coffee shops. She paused at that last one and met my eyes as if finally grasping the true stakes involved. Code enforcement posted a fluorescent orange stop work order on the HOA bulletin board. Then the sheriff read Marla her rights for tampering with public water infrastructure and criminal misuse of emergency authority. She tried to argue, but her voice had gone small and thin. 2 weeks later we all sat in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. The gallery was packed with residents, county officials, and 3 reporters who smelled blood in the water, so to speak. The projector displayed Marla's drain for safety slideshow in all its glory. Slide 3 featured that exploding dam from Uzbekistan. Slide 7 actually claimed that fish can live in mud if they try hard enough. Slide 9 had a pie chart that made no sense because the percentages added up to 143. Our county attorney choked on a cough drop and had to leave the room. The Water Authority presented flow charts and bacterial spike data from the hours immediately after the pumps started running. Restaurants had closed their kitchens. Dialysis units paused treatments and had to truck patients to facilities 30 miles away. A beloved bakery's sourdough starter met an early and tragic yeasty grave. The hospital administrator testified that they came within 2 hours of canceling elective surgeries due to water quality concerns. A microbiologist explained turbidity levels and coliform bacteria in terms that made several jurors look nauseous. Then came the engineers. They presented calculations showing that the lake level had dropped 18 inches in 4 hours. At that rate, the intake would have been exposed by midnight, leaving the entire valley without water by morning. The county's emergency management director testified about the disaster declaration they'd almost had to issue. She brought photographs of the water treatment plant's monitors flashing red, operators scrambling, and the backup wells that couldn't possibly supply 62,000 people. The lead engineer, a man who'd worked for county water for 30 years, explained that Crescent Tarn wasn't chosen randomly as a water source. It had consistent year-round flow, natural filtration through granite, and excellent mineral content. Replacing it would cost taxpayers $40 million in new wells and treatment infrastructure. The judge was a silver-haired man named Hartwell who pronounced the word watershed like it was a sermon from the mountaintop. He ruled that the HOA had wildly exceeded its authority, violated the county easement in the most egregious manner possible, and endangered public health on a scale that beggared belief. He levied fines against the HOA that sounded like phone numbers, over $300,000 for remediation and penalties, and ordered immediate corrective action at the association's expense. The real kicker came next. To stabilize water turbidity and restore ecological balance, Pinecrest Hollow HOA had to fund a new intake screen, complete shoreline native plantings, and a fish restocking program. All of it would be administered and monitored by the local middle school science club for community stewardship and educational purposes. The judge noted with barely concealed satisfaction that the science club had already submitted a very thorough proposal. Marla resigned from the HOA board that same afternoon with a terse email about focusing on family, but the judge wasn't finished with her. Her community service sentence required 60 consecutive mornings standing at the shore monitoring the inflow gauge while the science club, armed with clipboards and brutal teenage honesty, graded her performance like she was a lab specimen. But the community service was the least of her problems. The personal fines hit her account like a meteor strike. $15,000 for her role in the illegal drawdown, separate from the HOA's penalties. Another $8,000 for legal fees the county demanded as restitution. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover any of it, citing willful misconduct. When the gavel came down with that final amount and the judge announced it would not be covered by HOA insurance due to gross negligence and criminal recklessness, Marla's face went from red to white to a shade of gray I'd only seen on fish left too long in the sun. She opened her mouth but no sound came out, just a small clicking noise from the back of her throat. The bailiff asked if she understood the ruling. Her lawyer, who'd spent the whole trial looking like he wanted to be anywhere else, had to physically steady her by the elbow. She finally managed a tiny nod, her eyes fixed on some middle distance where maybe she was calculating how many years it would take to pay $23,000 on a school crossing guard salary.